Wow. Yeah. Thank you so much for clarifying. I think that this is indeed very important because as you were saying, when I started to talk about the ancient civilization, and you correctly highlighted the fact that in our society we have taken all of that and we have commoditized again the same force. The will to power has co-opted the will to self-exceed even in the ancient times and reformulated it. And again, we think we're self-exceeding, but we might actually not be doing that. And this is a word that's good for me to clarify, where you've differentiated becoming from having. And I think it's sometimes can be very subtle, but it's a good difference to identify. So let me ask you this. If we had the correct definition of self-exceeding, which is a lot of work in itself, I think it's a work of self-transformation within us to discriminate what self-exceeding really is. But if one was clear about that, then if you were to look at some of these civilizations and the technologies that they have produced, could you say something about how we could benefit from them or look at them?
Yes, Kina. So in technologies of the self, right? I mean, when we are talking about technologies of the self, we are assuming, and this is a term that Foucault uses when he's talking about the ancient Greek world and the ancient Christian world. And he's talking about the fact that before, say, the technologies of confession, right, which is, again, a subjective technology of social control, right? Before that happens, there's an inflection point. Before that, we have technologies of confessing to ourselves. In other words, what he calls truth-telling. The truth-telling can have two kinds of meanings. Truth-telling can mean telling oneself the truth about oneself, sincerity, because I have a certain goal in mind. I have to view myself dispassionately, this self-accountability, not from the viewpoint of some external authority, but from the viewpoint of what I want to become. So that becomes a certain kind of truth-telling as a technology of the self that Foucault is talking about. Another kind of technology of truth-telling is that if I'm in a state of consciousness, how do I tell truth about it? In other words, not tell truth as truth being separated from what is being told, but how does truth tell itself? Again, we come to poesis. Poesis is that. Poesis is the coming into matter, the coming into expression of truth. This is the difference between if I were to describe an experience to you, and if the experience bodies itself forth to you in language. This is actually also what makes the distinction between a guru who has had an experience, is writing from that experience, and a scholar that is writing about somebody else's experience. You see? So this is the kind of truth, and transmission of experience happens through that kind of process. Subjective technology, again, so it becomes technology that is a certain kind of method, but a method that is ultimately mysterious. It's a method up to a certain point, and beyond that point, it's a method that's utilized by the forces of creativity that are part of a self-exceeding, part of another state of consciousness.
Yes, as you were saying that earlier, one thing that was coming to me is that one has to look at technology itself as a process of art, as an artist's process, because oftentimes we have this bifurcation of considering it like an engineering problem, where it's, again, rationality is everything is limited to logic. And so you're kind of freeing that into, maybe logic has a place in there, but it's a very artistic process. And it seems like that the process is one of discovery, and there is a lot of, would you say that trust has to be an element in this mode of becoming of technology?
Absolutely, absolutely. They use the term Shraddha in Sanskrit, which sometimes is translated as faith. But it isn't faith as it's understood in the Western. I mean, the whole notion of a belief system is not present in it. Faith is this intuition of something that is guiding us, like the creative process from within that we trust in and know at a certain risk because it's transpersonal. We know it even when we don't know it. There's something inside us that knows and something in us that follows because it knows blindly sometimes that it follows. But coming back to this notion of the technologies of the self and the ancient methods, right? How do, say, if we were to look at India, and I'd say, coming back to this idea of yoga and its co-optation, yoga is a very, I mean, largely used, I mean, a very prolific word in Indian cultural history, civilizational history. And it can't be reduced to any one single thing. There's so many yogas, and yoga itself means so many things. Even in the earliest uses of the word yoga, and if you come ask people what is yoga, first they'll tell you about the physical practice. Then they might go to the Yoga Sutra as a canonical text of yoga, right? So that also they're not wrong, because in a way in India, you have the six darshanas and yoga is called a darshana. And that yoga that is called a darshana is coexisting with innumerable other things that are calling themselves yoga, right? The Gita calls itself a yoga from beginning to end. Every chapter is a yoga, and yet it feels the dialogue of Sankhya and yoga inside itself, you know? So it's like this. And then earliest uses of the word yoga come in the Upanishad, like the Katha Upanishad. And already there are a variety of inflections to what it may mean, you know? So I'd say this word yoga is very interesting. I'd say it is the plural field of the technologies of the self. This is the meaning of yoga. Yoga literally means to add, to unite. And so technologies of the self as technologies of the ecosystemic self, technologies, I mean, even the term eco in eco technology, eco has come to mean the earth, but eco literally means home. It's the world and anything larger than oneself that is one's home, So arriving at this larger sense of home, the world sense, the cosmic sense, or it could be just a natural sense, a sense which is somehow greater than what we take ourselves to be, coming into union with that, whatever it is self-exceeding. And that there are technologies for doing that. These technologies of the self, of producing the self as a larger being, form the field that we call yoga, So this is why I think, all the various yoga, you can look at it as two sections. One is descriptions of the psyche. What is the topography and what is the cosmography of the psyche? Because the psyche is not restricted to how you understand your subjective self. Ultimately, that seeps into and becomes one with the cosmic self, ranges of cosmic consciousness, right? So this related macrocosm and microcosm reality, union, yoga of a psychography or a kind of topography of esoteric sense of being and cosmography of the sense of the cosmos. That is one part of yoga. And the other part of yoga is methods. So you have descriptions and methods. These descriptions they're not descriptions that are absolute. There are people who tell you, oh, I went to study yoga psychology and they told me that the description of the human subject or the psyche is made up of these chakras, 7 chakras. It's made up of, the Purusha and the Prakriti, the Kundalini and things like that. There's a big terminology. All that terminology is related to the precedence of the goal of becoming and the technologies that empower that goal of becoming. There is no single system of chakras. There is no single description of the psyche. Each of these descriptions are descriptions by which we can be aided to arrive at what we want to become. What is the yoga that you're interested in? So the methods also are related in that sense.
Yes, absolutely. It seems that in ancient civilization, or many times, all aspects of even the city building and politics and stuff was targeted towards architecture itself, as you were saying earlier, that arts is a means for building that intuition. And that's not what's happening today. It's become, again, that consumerism and other things. So it really looks like that all aspects of the way we build homes and cities and technologies can be used to increase our intuition, optimize for that intuition of oneness.
Absolutely. And not only that, I think it can be the product of that intuition of oneness, the expression of that. We come back to poesis, the expressions of the exteriorization of the cosmos through us, right? And again, I think when we're talking about the past, we ought not to over-romanticize the past. I mean, in making these temples and things like that, it isn't that everybody was a yogi. I mean, many people were actually subjugated. There was a tremendous kind of, power differential at work in these societies. We have to be pretty unsentimental about that. I mean, we don't want to repeat that.
I think that's a very, very important